I still remember that morning so clearly, as if it never truly became the past, but continues to breathe somewhere inside me, in that quiet place where the greatest hopes live. The air in Southampton was cool and damp, carrying the scent of salt, wet wood, coal, and iron. Above the port hung a restless hum, human voices, wheels grinding against stone, the shouts of workers, whistles, orders, laughter, children crying, all blending into a strange, almost ceremonial noise, as if the entire city had come to witness not just a ship, but the beginning of a new age. I arrived at dawn with a single suitcase, an old wool coat, and a heart full of New York. I was born in a small English province, where even dreams seemed modest, as if they were not meant to grow too large. Our house stood beside a road where strangers rarely passed. The days repeated themselves. Women spoke of bread, laundry, weather, and marriage, as though nothing else existed beyond that circle. But I always knew somewhere beyond it all, there was another world. A world of wide streets, light, music, shop windows, unfamiliar faces, and endless possibility. A world where a girl without wealth, without a name, without connections, might one day become someone else. I saved for this journey for years, coin by coin. I denied myself everything. I sewed, washed, worked for others, endured quiet laughter when I said I would cross the Atlantic. You, they would say, what would you do in New York? I did not always have an answer, but I knew this. Staying meant never knowing who I could become. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was not a ship, but a city. A towering, impossible city of steel, smoke, and light. Its hull rose so high I had to tilt my head back just to see the top. Massive, silent, almost unreal. 4 great funnels. Endless rows of windows, deck upon deck upon deck. Thousands of people moving around it, and all of them looked small beside it. No story had prepared me for that moment. Around me stood people like myself, men with worn bags, women in simple hats, families with children, bundles, boxes. Some were traveling to relatives, some to work, some fleeing hardship, and some, like me, chasing something they could not fully explain. And among us moved others elegant, composed, dressed in fine coats and gloves, their confidence as polished as their luggage. Yet that morning, we all shared the same expression. Awe. I tightened my grip on my suitcase and suddenly felt afraid. Not of the ship, not of the ocean. I was afraid it might all disappear. That someone would touch my shoulder and I would wake up back home with rain tapping against the window and unfinished sewing on the table. But no one woke me. The line moved forward. Step by step, my fear turned into something brighter. When I stepped onto the gangway, my legs trembled. It was not just a step onto a ship. It was a step out of one life and into another. The wood beneath my feet felt solid. People passed by me. Crew members shouted instructions. Seagulls cried overhead. One. And inside me, something opened. I was leaving. I was really leaving. The decks, the corridors, the stairways, everything was larger than I had imagined. Even in the section meant for passengers like me, everything felt clean, organized, almost luxurious compared to what I had known. My cabin was small, but it was mine. A narrow bed, a wash basin, hooks, a shelf. I placed my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, and I cried. Not from sadness, from relief. I had done it. Later, I stepped onto the deck again. People waved from the shore. Some laughed, some cried, some stood silently, watching England grow smaller. I leaned against the railing and tried to memorize the land. Not because I loved everything I was leaving behind, but because every dream demands a price. And I felt, in that moment, I was paying for mine with the person I used to be. When the ship began to move, slowly, Almost gently, the shore drifted away. Voices faded. Houses shrank. And ahead of us, only water, light, and the unknown. I remember thinking then, whatever waits for me, hardship, loneliness, struggle, it will be mine. And I did not yet know that the most beautiful beginnings often belong to stories that end in darkness. The first days aboard the ship were so beautiful that now, looking back, I think of them almost as something impossible, as if a few pages from someone else's overly happy story had somehow been placed into my life. The Titanic lived its own life, measured, smooth, confident. From early morning until late evening, it did not simply carry us across the ocean, it surrounded us with a special kind of order, where everything seemed carefully thought out to the smallest detail. Even its sound was unusual, not loud, not harsh, but constant, deep, and muted, as if somewhere beneath us a great metal heart was beating. Sometimes I would stand in the corridor or on the deck and feel that subtle vibration through the ship's body, and it made me feel calm. The ship was alive, vast, powerful, and we were all inside its protected world. I loved watching people. On a ship like this, it became an experience of its own. Every morning, the decks filled with faces, voices, dresses, hats, manners, and accents. You could pass an entire Irish family sharing bread and apples, a serious gentleman reading a newspaper, a young mother rocking her child, or a couple in love holding hands and gazing at the ocean as if it had been created just for them. Sometimes I managed to catch a glimpse of first-class passengers, and I could not help but admire them. Their clothing, the ease of their movements, their familiarity with beauty, everything about them spoke of a life far removed from the one I had known. Yet, to my surprise, I felt almost no envy, only curiosity. I wondered what it must be like to live as though the world truly opened itself to you without struggle. I spent much time walking along the decks I was allowed to access. The sea changed every day, pale gray like silk beneath mist, then deep blue, then almost silver in the evening light. Sometimes it seemed endlessly calm, and the ship cut through its surface so smoothly that the very word danger felt irrelevant. The seagulls had long disappeared. There was only water, sky, and the wind, carrying the scent of cold, salt, and freedom. Evenings were especially beautiful. Lights came alive in the portholes, the decks glowed softly, and distant music drifted through the air. Even if I could not see the orchestra, I could hear the sound of violins and piano floating through the ship, blending with the breath of the ocean. Sometimes I closed my eyes and imagined I had already arrived in New York, a city where the streets also shimmered, hummed, and promised a new life. On the ship, I met several women like myself, not wealthy, but full of hope. One was traveling to her brother in Brooklyn, another planned to work as a maid, and a third said that in America, it was enough to be hardworking, and everything would fall into place. We shared stories, bread, laughter, and that peculiar feeling that exists only during a journey when you are no longer home, but not yet where you are going. One afternoon, I found a place from which I could glimpse part of the more luxurious interiors. It lasted only a moment, but I remember it vividly. Light falling from above, the shine of polished wood, carpets, staircases, women in light dresses, waiters, flowers, silver, and warm golden air. Everything seemed so refined that I stood still, as if I were looking at the set of a play. I thought then, people had not simply built a ship. They had built a belief that beauty and comfort could conquer even the forces of nature. In the dining hall for our class, the food was better than I had expected. Hot meals, bread, soup, tea, not luxury, of course, but enough to make me feel not like a poor immigrant, but like a part of something larger and meaningful. At the tables, people spoke of work, of relatives, of the future, and the words America, New York, new life were repeated so often that they began to sound like a prayer. I especially loved the evenings on the open deck. I would wrap myself in my coat and step outside to look at the sky. I had never seen so many stars before. In the countryside, the sky could be clear, but here, in the middle of the ocean, it seemed deeper, closer, as if the whole world had turned into a vast, dark bowl of light and water. Sometimes I felt as though the ship was not sailing, but flying so smooth, so steady was its motion. None of us spoke of death. No one spoke of shipwreck. On the contrary, the conversations were filled with confidence. People repeated that the Titanic was the finest ship ever to sail the seas. They spoke of its size, its innovations, its strength, its safety. Even those who had once feared the ocean felt secure aboard this liner. It inspired trust simply by existing, and I trusted it too. I remember one particularly clear evening. The wind was colder than usual, but the sky was incredibly pure, and the sea looked like black glass. I stood by the railing and thought of New York, of how one day I would find a room, a job, buy myself a new dress, and send a letter home saying that I had succeeded. I imagined streets, bridges, shop windows, unfamiliar voices. I was afraid, but it was a sweet kind of fear. The fear of life, not of death. Now it seems almost cruel that happiness can be so complete just before a catastrophe. In those days, I often caught myself thinking that for the first time, I no longer felt like a poor girl from an English province, but like someone who was allowed to want more, as if the ship itself, with its light, music, motion, and endless variety of people was telling me, you have already stepped beyond the world that gave you a small place. You are already on your way. You have already changed. If someone had told me then that these would be the brightest days of my life, I would have laughed and said that my real life had not even begun yet. But perhaps the happiest moments are not given to promise the future, but to make the loss of light unbearable when it finally disappears. That evening was especially cold. I remember this not because I was afraid at the time, but because I noticed my hands, they grew numb so quickly, as if the air itself had suddenly become sharper. The sea that night felt strange, too calm, too still. There was no familiar shimmer of waves, no white foam, no movement that could usually be seen even in darkness. The surface of the ocean lay black and smooth like stone, like a mirror, like an abyss one does not wish to look into. The ship, however, went on as usual. People talked, walked, laughed. Somewhere, music was playing. Some were preparing for sleep. Others still drank tea. Others made plans for arrival. Nothing suggested that within a few hours, this entire world would cease to exist. I was below, getting ready for bed, when I felt a slight jolt. Not a crash, more like a long, strange shudder, as if someone had dragged a nail across metal. It was not frightening, not sudden, and so at first, no one was truly alarmed. Someone in the corridor even laughed and said that perhaps we had lost a propeller or simply stopped. I stepped out of my cabin and saw others just like me, sleepy, wrapped in coats, questions in their eyes, but no fear yet. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an inconvenience. But then, something in the crew's behavior changed something that made the cold inside me for the first time. Sailors moved quickly, too quickly. Men asked questions and received short, reluctant answers. Passengers were told to put on warm clothing and life belts. Some protested, some laughed, some did not believe it was serious. How could one believe in danger on a ship like this? I did not believe it either, not at once, but I put on my coat, tied my scarf, picked up a few belongings, and then put them back. For some reason, it felt wrong to think about luggage in that moment, as if the very thought of possessions was offensive in the presence of something that had not yet been named. When I stepped onto the deck, the cold struck my face so sharply that it stole my breath. The sky was clear, filled with countless stars, and the entire ship looked like a brightly lit island in the middle of endless blackness. People stood in groups, talking, trying to understand what was happening. Some joked too loudly. Some were already crying. Others tried to calm children. Commands echoed. Machinery creaked. Lifeboats were being lowered. And then I saw one of them descend, very slowly, very carefully, and almost empty. In that moment, something inside me broke. I do not know at what point curiosity turns into terror. It does not happen instantly. First, you are simply cold. Then uncomfortable. Then uneasy. Then you notice people are no longer standing calmly, but moving with a new, restless urgency. Then you hear a child crying, and no one can quiet them. Then you see a woman's face, not looking at her husband or the sea, but somewhere inward where the knowledge has already taken root. And then fear enters you as well. The bow of the ship seemed to sink slightly lower, just a little, but I felt it. Something in the very structure of the world beneath my feet had changed. Around me, voices repeated, "Women and children first. It's nothing serious. It's just a precaution." They said it so insistently that it only made it more terrifying. Men tried to lift their wives and daughters into the boats. Some women refused to leave without their husbands. Others did not want to step into those small wooden lifeboats above the black water. I did not want to either. They seemed fragile, almost absurd compared to the vast, glowing body of the Titanic. To leave the great ship for a small boat meant accepting that the ship itself could die, and that was almost impossible to believe. But the ship continued to change. Music still played, faint, distant, as if from another world. That made it worse. In such a moment, music felt unbearably human and utterly helpless. I do not remember how long I moved across the deck. Time no longer flowed, it shattered. A shout, a command, hands on my shoulders, the scrape of metal, a child crying, a woman calling a name, breath turning to mist, the sharp clarity of stars, and always the cold darkness around us. I tried to get closer to the lifeboats, but there were too many people. Movement became chaotic. Some pushed, some clung, some prayed. One man tried to hand a child into a descending boat. A woman beside me kept repeating she could not swim, as if that still mattered. Another kept asking where her sister was. No one truly heard anyone anymore. We were all speaking into fear, not to each other. I remember one terrible moment. I turned and saw the faces of those who would not be allowed into the boats. Men, young and old, well-dressed and poor, calm and pale. Some still tried to hold dignity. Others no longer hid their terror. And in that instant, I understood. Fear had become shared, only expressed differently. The night grew colder. The air itself seemed to cut into my lungs. My hands were numb. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached one lifeboat too late. It was already being lowered. I could not reach another. Someone shouted at me to jump. Someone else told me to move back. Someone pushed me hard, and I lost my balance, striking the railing. And then I understood. Truly, I might not survive. Not as one among many, but me. I stood in the middle of that brightly lit horror and suddenly wanted to live so fiercely that it almost tore a cry from my throat. Not for America. Not for dreams. Not for a dress or a room in New York. Just to live, to breathe, to see morning. To hear an ordinary human voice, again, not in panic, but at a table, at work, on a street. Everything that once felt small suddenly became precious. The ship was now clearly tilting. It was harder to stand. People slipped, fell, grabbed onto railings. A scream cut through the air, then another. The lights still burned, making everything look unreal, as if the nightmare had been given too much light. And then true horror began. The noise became unbearable. Not one sound, thousands at once. Metal tearing, orders shouted, crying, prayers, footsteps, crashes. A deep internal roar, as if the ship itself were suffering, resisting its own destruction. I no longer knew where to go. The crowd moved like something alive, driven by fear. And then I saw the water again, closer. I do not know how it happened. Perhaps the deck gave way beneath me. Perhaps someone pushed me. Perhaps I stepped wrong, trying to hold on. I remember only the moment of slipping, the sudden loss of balance, fingers I could not grasp, and then I was overboard. The water was not cold in the way I understood cold. It was violence, a shock, as if my body stopped belonging to me. Air tore from my lungs. The black water closed above me, and for a moment, the world disappeared. When I surfaced, there was hell all around me. Screams, everywhere, screams. People calling for help, calling for mothers, husbands, God. Some thrashed nearby, some vanished. Some clung to others, dragging them down. Above us rose the ship, enormous, terrifying, still glowing. I will never forget that sight. A giant liner, once perfect, now standing against the stars like a doomed city, sinking not away from us but downward into its own destruction. I tried to breathe, but my lungs tightened. My fingers went numb instantly. I could barely feel my legs. The water seeped into everything, taking strength, memory, will. Someone struck my shoulder. Someone grabbed my coat and disappeared. I tried to swim, but my body no longer obeyed me. Darkness surrounded us, broken only by the fading light of the ship and the pale faces in the water. Then the light began to die. I heard screams, hundreds, perhaps thousands. I had never known a human voice could sound like that. In those cries, there was everything: fear, pain, disbelief, pleading, madness, loneliness. And then, though time had already lost, meaning they began to change. Fewer, weaker, more distant. I tried to remember New York, the port, a street I might one day walk. I tried to hold onto a single warm thought, but memory blurred. Faces, windows, light, black water. The last thing I remember is darkness. Cold, endless darkness, as if the world had ended and left only water and sky. And the screams, they were still there, closer, farther, everywhere. And then they began to fade. And I do not know if I faded with them.